In 1834, a 34-year-old man stood in a cramped, dimly lit kitchen in New York City. His hands were stained with powder, the air thick with the acrid scent of chemicals and scorched rubber. Scraps of a strange white substance littered the table and floor. To neighbors, he was the eccentric lunatic who melted things for no reason. To himself, he was one step away from changing the world. His name was Charles Goodyear. Charles Goodyear was born in 1800 in New Haven, Connecticut, into a modest household. As the oldest of 6 children, he bore the weight of responsibility from a young age. His father, a hardware merchant, barely scraped by. But Charles wasn't just helping around the shop, he was captivated by the tools themselves. He didn't just want to use them, he wanted to understand them. At just 10 years old, he was disassembling locks and gadgets to see how they worked. Not because someone told him to, but because he couldn't help himself. He had no formal education beyond basic schooling, but he was a voracious learner. Charles taught himself physics, chemistry, and engineering by reading books and observing real life. Even in hardship, his imagination soared beyond the limits of his small-town life. At 21, Charles partnered with his father to start a metalworking business. It was ambitious but short-lived. Their venture folded within a year due to financial mismanagement and inexperience. This marked the beginning of a long chain of failures. Undeterred, Charles tried selling buttons. Then he opened a hardware store. He even experimented with agricultural inventions. But every business failed. He borrowed money and couldn't pay it back. Creditors came knocking, lawsuits followed. Soon, Charles Goodyear became a regular visitor to debtor's prison. Each time he emerged poorer than before, but somehow more determined. In 1831, something new began to circulate in American markets. India rubber. Imported from Brazil, this strange, elastic material could stretch, bend, and repel water. It felt like magic. Soon, the market was flooded with rubber shoes, coats, and waterproof bags. But the magic didn't last. In summer, the rubber products melted into sticky blobs. In winter, they hardened like glass. Warehouses reeked of rotting rubber, thousands of customers demanded refunds. Entire companies collapsed. Where others saw disaster, Charles saw destiny. He believed that if he could fix rubber's flaws, its sensitivity to temperature, he would unlock a material more valuable than gold. Charles Goodyear became obsessed. He bought rubber with borrowed money. He conducted messy experiments in his backyard. He mixed it with powders, oils, acids, anything he could think of. He believed he was close, he could feel it, but poverty closed in. To fund his work, he sold household items. His family ate cheap bread and beans. When they could no longer pay rent, they moved into a rubber-scented workshop, sleeping next to barrels of chemicals. The neighbors complained of the smell. Friends pleaded with him to stop. His own family doubted him, but he persisted. Because in his mind, the solution was just one experiment away. When Charles was jailed again for unpaid debts, he didn't ask for a lawyer, he asked for rubber. He convinced his wife to smuggle in a batch of raw rubber and a makeshift rolling pin. Inside a cramped cell, using only primitive tools, he continued his work alone, broke, but still burning with vision. Day after day, he adjusted formulas, tested new mixtures. He wasn't just experimenting, he was surviving through creation. His belief in rubber became spiritual. He once told a friend, "God gave it to us for a reason. I'm just trying to understand that reason." In 1839, inside a modest apartment in New York, a tired, frustrated Goodyear accidentally dropped a lump of rubber mixed with sulfur onto a hot stovetop. He didn't think much of it until he tried to peel it off. To his shock, the rubber hadn't melted or stuck. It had transformed. It was no longer brittle, no longer sticky. It was tough yet flexible, weather-resistant, consistent. Goodyear realized something monumental had just happened. He had discovered vulcanization, a chemical process that stabilized rubber by heating it with sulfur. This was it. The breakthrough he had sacrificed everything for. In 1844, he patented the vulcanization process. U.S. patent number 3633. But Goodyear, despite being a genius, was a terrible businessman. He licensed his invention to small firms in Europe for shockingly low fees. Meanwhile, other industrialists, particularly in England and France, rushed to commercialize the process. One of them, Thomas Hancock, beat Goodyear to the British Patent Office. Goodyear spent the next 15 years embroiled in lawsuits. He won a few, but the legal fees drained what little money he had. He never built a factory of his own. He never scaled his invention. He had created the future but watched others profit from it. Charles traveled to Europe to fight infringement. In France, he sued a company for using vulcanized rubber in military supplies, but lost. Worse, he was arrested again in Paris for unpaid debts and spent weeks in a foreign jail. His health declined, but his spirit never did. Even as creditors seized everything he owned, he wrote letters from his prison cell about the future of rubber in medicine, transportation, and war. He could envision airplanes, ships, and cities that ran on rubber, but he couldn't pay for a warm meal. In 1855, Goodyear returned to America, exhausted. He was sick, penniless, and nearly forgotten by the world he helped modernize. He died 5 years later, in 1860, in New York City at the age of 59. His final assets were 2 rubber samples, a rusted stovetop, and a pile of unpaid bills. But his name was far from finished. In 1898, decades after his death, a group of investors founded the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company in Akron, Ohio. They named it not because Charles Goodyear worked with them, but because his vulcanization process made everything they did possible. The winged foot of Mercury became their logo, honoring Goodyear's relentless pursuit of speed, endurance, and progress. The company went on to become one of the largest tire manufacturers in the world. Today, vulcanized rubber is everywhere: tires, medical gloves, seals and gaskets, industrial belts, electrical insulation, sports equipment, spacecraft components. It's a trillion-dollar foundation to modern civilization. And it began with a man who mixed rubber and sulfur on a stove in a rented kitchen. Goodyear didn't just invent a process, he reshaped the world. Charles Goodyear's story is more than history. It's a wake-up call. A great idea is not enough. Vision must be paired with strategy. Invention is meaningless without protection. John Pemberton invented Coca-Cola, then sold it for a few $100s. The Wright brothers flew before anyone but failed to control the aviation industry. Talent without business sense is like gold buried in sand. If this story inspired you, don't let it end here. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Hit like if you believe invention deserves reward. Subscribe for more stories about inventors, dreamers, and the people who built the modern world, yet were left behind. This isn't just a biography, it's a blueprint, a warning, and a tribute. See you in the next video.